Hey everyone, it's Stuffy here in place of Spanners today as it is his wife's birthday this weekend. So I'm going to be giving you my thoughts today on the sprint race because it's not just Spanners who has unresearched gut reactions, because we have squad depth here at Missed Apex. But yes, that sprint race, what was my initial thoughts about it? I've come round to the idea of sprint races over the years. I have been softened just like Spanners has done as well. But that today, I had concerns about Spa being a sprint race. Initially, we have been here before, and it wasn't exactly a thrilling affair, and that was what we saw here today. What we saw was a sprint race to the fifth corner at the end of the Kemmel Straight to Lacombe because of the setup differences and approaches that the McLarens had compared to Max Verstappen on the low downforce setup and others behind them, as Charles Leclerc also found himself getting past Lando Norris into turn 5. That was what it was. Oscar Piastri, unbelievable record lap time yesterday, beating the W11 in tremendous fashion, 7 tenths over a car that I thought we would never see beaten. Brilliant from him, but with a much more draggier setup, which McLaren have kind of depended on for the majority of this season because they have a much more well-balanced car compared to Red Bull. Max, we know that this particular circuit, you're on full throttle for over 70% of the time around the lap here at Spa, and top speed in a race scenario is what you need. And it's all well and good being quick in the corners and quick in the middle sector. As we saw today, as we saw last year, it's difficult to overtake here without a tyre offset, and you can have the overall quicker car, but you may not have the quicker car when it comes to race trim. And that's something that we saw today. Max knew he had to get ahead of Oscar into turn 5. Otherwise, it was see you later, Oscar Piastri, and he was going to win that race comfortably and showcase the pace that we know he did show yesterday. But yeah, they had no answer. Lando also fell foul to Charles Leclerc's overtake as well and slipstream down into turn 5. He was running a bit more of a trimmed setup as well. A lot of the teams were further down the grid. Esteban Ocon and Haas, who we'll get on to, did tremendously well in this sprint race. But it was a dash to the turn 5, as it has been so often at Spa, unfortunately. And what we saw is why we need tyre offsets, why we need degradation. We need some form of tyre management to see overtakes here at this circuit, because every driver was on the medium except for Colapinto with Alpine, just probably data gathering. And we saw 4 overtakes. Now, I'm quite positive about F1, always am, always look on the brighter side of things, but that was, a drab affair, unfortunately. And it was only Hamilton's little battle, mini battle at the end with Alex Albon that provided any sort of drama. Now, back to the front with Verstappen, Piastri and Lando Norris. Verstappen did exactly what he needed to do. Once again, executed in a high-pressured moment, executed with one opportunity, what he needed to do perfectly. Get past Oscar Piastri and slingshot round him into turn 5. And he did it comfortably. And that is so often the case with Max Verstappen and what we see from him so often, which is why he has won the titles that he has done. We've seen that car is tricky to handle. It is still a quick car, 100% still a quick car, but in certain circumstances, in certain setups, as we saw at Silverstone, as we have seen here. Not quick over a single lap, but he knew that the race win, for the sprint race win, was there. And he got it. Because Oscar Piastri, with that more downforce dependent setup, not by much, but still enough, because they were tremendous in the middle sector all day yesterday, McLaren. And that's all well and good if you're in clean air over a single lap in qualifying, but no good in this current iteration of ground effect era cars, where the dirty air is still very prevalent. And when you've got, obviously, no tyre offset, no tyre degradation or very little, and everyone's on the same age of tyre and the same compound, Max could go as slow as he wanted to in that middle sector and not have to worry about Oscar Piastri overtaking him. And then it was just, I'll put my foot down on full throttle. And even with a tow and DRS, Oscar Piastri didn't really have a viable opportunity. Now, he had around 9 laps of a go at Max Verstappen. He never once throughout this whole 15-lap race go with outside the DRS zone or outside that 1 second range of Max Verstappen. And Oscar Piastri played it smartly this race, really, because he knew in himself that he didn't have the top speed to get back past Max. He tried. There was a couple of times where he did get close and Max had to kind of cover him off a little bit and just park his car in the middle of the track. But there was never a full opportunity for Oscar to really slingshot round the outside. It was a gamble not worth taking because in the grand scheme of things, his fight is with Lando Norris in the championship. And that's exactly what I think played on Oscar Piastri's mind here today, because Lando, once he regained the position back from Charles Leclerc, he had a bit of clean air and he got back up behind Oscar Piastri and within that DRS zone very quickly. But even then, Norris didn't have enough once he got into the dirty air and got into that range of Max and Piastri to have an opportunity of getting past them. And of course, Lando's also thinking about the bigger game, but Piastri was noted that he was using his battery at a mid-level, so he's obviously deploying it in a different fashion than maybe what you'd normally expect. That's what I kind of interpreted that message from Will, Lando's engineer, that was them saying, well, he's not really going on the attack. Obviously, they'd know in themselves what mid-level means in relation to where that battery is specifically being deployed, because why would Oscar try and overtake Max Verstappen and leave himself open to an overtake of Lando Norris behind and lose what could be an all-important championship point come the end of the season, because I do think it's going to be very close throughout. Whereas now he's gained a point and he's now increased his championship lead to 9 points rather than it be at 8 points. And if the scenario happens where McLaren dominate on Sunday and it's a 1-2 again, and let's say Lando does come out on top, there's only 7 points difference there, and Oscar still leads going into the Hungary race in a week's time, rather than losing a point to Lando by trying to go for an additional point on Max Verstappen, and he ends up losing the championship lead after this weekend. All hypotheticals, of course, all what ifs, but that is a smart decision, a smart play there by Oscar. And you could see that he was just lifting, not even going for the move and even poking his nose on Max, because what was the point? There was nothing really overall to gain there. There was much more to lose. And it was very smart driving, I think, from Oscar Piastri, because he quickly saw and read the situation of what was unfolding ahead of him, and especially knowing for 10 odd laps that he was behind Max, he couldn't get past him. So it was only if Max would make a clear and obvious error, which I think he had one little moment, but for the most part, always had Oscar covered with that additional top speed and that low downforce setup. Oscar played it perfectly, and Lando has always been off the pace, really, of Oscar since yesterday. So, 1-0, 2-0 now, really, I guess, with the sprint quali, and this race to Oscar Piastri over Lando Norris this weekend, and they all head, of course, into qualifying, where things could be a bit more different, with a lot of rain potentially on the horizon for Sunday, as thus far it's been a uncharacteristic dry weekend. So now we have to talk really about the standout performers of this sprint format, I think, this weekend, excluding Max Verstappen, who we've already spoken about, because Haas just scored double points in a sprint race. Unbelievable from them. 5th and 7th, Ocon in 5th and Behrman in 7th. Ocon held off Carlos Sainz, who also did a very good job here, and no doubt is the confidence booster that he needs after being clearly outperformed by Albon for the majority of this season. But they were quickest in Sector 1 throughout all of qualifying yesterday. I mean, they have trimmed everything off of that car, and they, managed to hold on to those positions. They held on to them comfortably. As we mentioned, there was only 4 overtakes in this sprint race, so not a lot to talk about in that regard. And we was hoping it wouldn't necessarily be the case for this year because of what happened last year. But the sprint race has, unfortunately, I think maybe if it is a dry race tomorrow, given us a bit of an insight into what the first stint will look like, which is what sprint races have done in the past. But they were there on merits, and they absolutely got it bang on with their setups, and they comfortably held off. Ocon comfortably held off Carlos Sainz in the Williams, and Behrman comfortably held off Hadjar, who was pressuring him for the majority of the race. And that is brilliant from Haas, and it's something that I think Ollie Behrman needs as well, because he has showcased some good performances recently and some good pace. However, he has let himself down with some unnecessary penalties, which has removed him from scoring some good points. So intrigued to see how they are able to manage this, potentially with rain coming tomorrow. Lots of important decisions to be made about whether they stick with the same level of downforce or if they add some, and whether that performance, whether they stay in that order. I do think there's going to be a change up of the order quite up and down the grid as maybe more downforce is added to these cars with the expected rain. So qualifying is going to be super interesting as I'm recording this. Not yet happened. We will discuss that in our race review, of course, Sunday evening and for your Monday morning commute. But Sainz, a very good confidence booster for him there, splitting the two Haases. Hadjar once again doing very well, scoring that last sole point. Very good from him. Liam Lawson also not too shabby as well, not too far behind his teammate in P10, and Bortoletto also in P9. So great to see some fresh young faces in the top 10 there. But of course, we have to now talk about the lesser performers. Ferrari. Sorry, Tifosi. I am blaming Ferrari's poor performance on myself, because I did wear my Ferrari shirt yesterday, and it does seem to have a curse. So I am not wearing it no longer, or maybe until I think I can break that curse. Because, of course, Lewis Hamilton. Charles Leclerc did do well. Let's start with Charles. He did do well. He's maximising that car as best as he possibly can. P4, not happy in that car whatsoever, but he's doing what he needs to do. And fourth is as best as he possibly could achieve. There's no way he can compete with the top three. And I think Charles is just looking forward to the end of this season, to be honest with you, and hoping for 2026 is a much fresher opportunity for him and a newer opportunity. But Lewis, all this talk of a brand new suspension, all this talk of new updates, and the rear's lock, and he starts 18th. I mean, uncharacteristic of Lewis. Is it a driver error? Was it something to do with the car itself? I'm leaning more so on the side of it's more so the car and the way that the car is set up. So from what I have heard is that the way that the car is having to be driven at the moment is that the rear brakes, the rear brake bias has to be quite far rearwards. Of course, that means it's more prone to rear locking. That is a sort of mistake that you do not see from an experienced driver of any kind, let alone into a corner that he has driven into for many a time. And the way that car is driving at the moment, regardless, you shouldn't see your experienced drivers making those mistakes. So something is fundamentally wrong with those cars. I don't think that's something that any driver up and down the grid would make on the regular, unless they've consciously decided to put more pressure rearwards on the brakes, and that's how the car is driving. He was complaining about the car bottoming him out and having no rear in this race and in FP1. So it's just a bit all over the place and so difficult to get confidence in that car. But then on the flip side, Charles Leclerc is able to get P4 out of it. So yeah, some criticism has to be laid at him to some extent, but still just a bizarre one. And then once again, he showcases in the race that, yeah, he does still have some racing chops, and he is able to perform better in a race. Always has done. His qualifying has always been poor in this set of regulations. However, you do expect him to be able to comfortably overtake a Sauber or a Stake F1 of Nico Hulkenberg, a Williams of Alex Albon. So I'm not going to give him too much credit there. But yeah, he'll be hoping, of course, that they can fix their issues heading into the weekend, where they can now change their setup. But poor from them, poor from Mercedes as well. George Russell supposedly got damage from Kimi Antonelli's big off through Stavlo, turn 14, where he spun the car. Proper rookie mistake. There's been, of course, a lot of pressure being applied to Antonelli recently, which I think, look, we all expected him to make some mistakes at some point in the season, and we're starting to see that now. But I don't think there's anything too much to fret about. There's still another opportunity for him this weekend, Antonelli, but that did in turn actually ruin George Russell's qualification, which meant he started 13th, only gained a position because of Pierre Gasly having a water leak. But Antonelli's spin caused George Russell to pick up damage through the gravel that was displaced onto track. And Lewis Hamilton also was a car that was close behind them, and he had a snap of oversteer on his first run through that corner due to the lack of grip of the gravel from Kimi. So kind of caused, in air quotes, Lewis Hamilton and his teammate to have poor qualifications. But yeah, with a difficult track to overtake, and I can't believe Spa has been difficult to overtake at. It was never really going to be a good sprint race for him and Mercedes. Very, very different contrast to where they were this time last year, where they got a 1 and 2. I know George Russell got disqualified, but they arguably had a car that was quick enough to finish 1-2, and they definitely won the race with Lewis Hamilton. So yeah, bizarre times for Mercedes. And the last standout performer for me, I think, is Pierre Gasly, someone who just has terrible luck. Maybe it's just because he's in Alpine, but I mean, he is doing wonderful things in that car at the moment, consistently getting it into Q3 or fighting and pushing for Q3. The races, unfortunately, don't necessarily go his way because of how that car is performing at the moment. But I mean, he's really underrated, not getting enough credit, in my personal opinion. And to put it P8 yesterday, and to have the misfortune of a water leak on the starting grid, which meant that he did eventually start the race, but from the pit lane and 2 laps down, was a real shame, an absolute real shame, and something that he didn't deserve. And he ended up finishing behind his teammate Colapinto, who is just not at the races at the moment, but is now into his 7th out of 5th race that he was afforded. So don't know what's happening there with Colapinto. Another poor performance for him. But on the flip side, yeah, Gasly is I just hope that, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me he qualifies high up again, outperforms that car, and is flirting with the points. He deserves it because, yeah, that was a real shame. But what do we expect from Renault engines, eh? It was, we don't have high expectations. Maybe them going to Mercedes will be a blessing in disguise for them come 2026. And that pretty much brings us the end to this sprint race review because, let's be honest, there wasn't so much to talk about with only there being 4 overtakes. I think I have discussed everything that went on. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed it in Spanner's absence. Hopefully the race on Sunday is a lot more exciting. Hopefully that wasn't just a preview of the first stint on Sunday. I think with the weather, as I keep mentioning, I'm fingers crossed it is going to rain because I think that's the only way we're going to get a really good race on Sunday with some changeable conditions, because that was a sprint race of old, wasn't it, where it was just a preview of potentially the first stint of a race on Sunday. The sprint races, I've softened to them. They're in a much better place now. We can change the setups between the sprint race and then the qualifying for the race on Sunday. That really shakes up the order. I still think that will be the case, but some tracks just don't lend themselves to the sprint race format, and I think Spa is definitely one of those. I don't know why we don't go to the Red Bull Ring. Let's head back to the shorter, more loaded circuits where we have more effective DRS zones like the Red Bull Ring, like Interlagos, that they provide good sprint races, whereas the likes of Shanghai and Spa, the much longer circuits, have clearly evidenced that they don't. But I'm still quietly positive about the sprint races, and I can't believe I am saying that. The Stuffy of 3 years ago would be hitting me round the back of the head right now. But hey, I guess time is a healer, hey? And there we go. That is finally the end of this sprint race review. I have been Stuffy in place of Spanners, who is hopefully not in the doghouse. We will let you know, as we will be back for our race review on Sunday evening, and of course for your Monday morning commute for hopefully a much more interesting full Spa race.